Thank you all for coming on a Friday night. We're really pleased to see you here. Firstly, I have to thank Lawrence Sillars, the director of the Henry Moore Institute, who has generously made tonight's guest lecture possible. We are delighted to welcome Michael Landy to Leeds School of Arts at Leeds Beckett University. Now bear with me with the next bit, because you know I like lists. Michael Craig Martin was one of the key tutors at Goldsmiths University, who alongside tutors such as John Thompson, Helen Chadwick, Richard Wentworth and Mark Wallinger, inspired a whole generation of YBA artists. The core of the YBA group graduated from the Goldsmiths BA Fine Art degree course in the classes of 1987 to 1990. Liam Gillick, Fiona Ray, Sarah Lucas were graduates in the class of 87. Ian Davenport, Michael Landy, Gary Hume, Anna Galaccio, and Angela Bullock were graduates in the class of 1988. Damien Hirst, Angus Fairhurst, Matt Collishaw, Simon Patterson, and Abigail Lane were graduates from the class of 1989, whilst Gillian Waring and Sam Taylor-Wood were graduates from the class of 1990. Michael Landy was one of the students taught by Michael Craig Martin, and in the documentary, The Last Art Film, by Jake Albach, Craig Martin had the following eloquent words to say about Michael Landy. He was a quiet person, but he did something very extraordinary as a student. He hardly ever did anything that wasn't interesting. I can remember almost everything he did. That's not true of any student I ever taught. He hardly ever, and I would think, this one's a kind of fluke. He stumbled on this, it's quite good, and then he would do something else, and it would be just as good, if not better. This was very, very unusual. And there was something else about him in particular. He may have thought of himself as something of an outsider, but he always had enormous respect from the other students. I don't think there were any individual who was held in more respect for some aspect of genuineness or integrity or something. There was some chord he struck that was very particular. Michael, we are thrilled to have you here, and now I pass over to Lawrence Sillars, director of the Henry Moore Institute, to say a few words.
Thank you ever so much, Simon, and we're really thrilled to be hosting this talk in collaboration with you this evening and to celebrate the end of our academic open day at the Institute. So thanks also to my brilliant colleagues down the road for organising everything. I'm hugely excited to welcome Michael to Leeds and to hear about his career this evening. I've been lucky enough to visit Michael's studio on a number of occasions over quite a few years, and each time I arrived, I was mildly anxious to see it was completely empty. And just as we walked up here this evening, I asked if it was still empty, and sure enough, it is. I don't think that's a legacy of him destroying everything he could possibly destroy in 2001 with Breakdown, which we'll hear about in a while. I think nothing is a place of productivity and comfort for Michael, and reducing everything to the void and starting again is this sort of creative sanctity for him. And I think that's very special. And while I don't want to talk about too many of his works in this introduction, because I'll spoil what he has to say, and it's far more interesting to hear them in his words, I did just want to touch upon three works that have been especially important, actually, for me personally, but also in this trajectory of art history that we're all absorbed in, and that kind of tease out this relationship with nothingness. And one of them happened in 1995, a work that was made then and was actually shown in Leeds opposite the Henry Moore Institute in 1996. 1995 was a time when this country was really experiencing the wake of Thatcher's labour market reforms, and it was a pretty depressed moment. I think 1 in 10 people were unemployed, and her reforms had brought about an emptiness, a hollowness, and a kind of section of society that was really disposable. And Michael made a work called Scrap Heap Services that offered a solution. It was a cleaning enterprise, a waste disposal company that, complete with a livery and a cast of hundreds of thousands of characters, stand-ins for the unemployed, these unmarketable labourers, offered a solution of clearance so we could get back to perhaps a better state of living. Of course, this was an absolutely haunting and urgent rejection of Thatcher's legacy, and for me was one of the most potent responses to Thatcherite Britain made, full stop. And it's also really exciting that that was shown in Leeds. I don't know how many people here saw it, but a very nice legacy of this city and Michael's relationship with us. In a further act of clearance, in 2001, he of course realised Breakdown, which saw the systematic cataloguing and destruction of every single thing that he owned. 7,227 objects, artifacts, clothes, artworks, his car, you name it, it went. He reduced everything to nothing and sort of freed of the weight of commerce, of our commodity culture. That was a point of rebirth for him. And I think that bounce back is something we see so often in his career. Personally, for me, it was also a work, a moment, a kind of quite era-defining moment that confirmed that I had chosen the right thing to do with my professional life and work with artists. And from this, in a kind of phoenix-like act, came the Nourishment portfolio, a portfolio of etchings that had an unbelievably humble origin. And Michael would navigate the streets of London looking at his surroundings, the exact opposite of what you just said you do, but you were doing it then, and would see these little weeds, these little moments of accidental nature puncturing through urban life, being threatened with destruction at any moment, however invisible they were. And he would pick them, and he would take them back to his studio, and he would plant them, feed them, water them, and they would grow, and life would become a visible and a documentable thing through nature. And these informed these exquisite etchings that I know we're going to have some images of in a little while. Since then and before then, his successes and his impact has been numerous and international. Just casting an eye over certain things, closing down sale, acts of kindness, these phenomenal projects that have taken place in Australia recently. Again, your incredibly poignant, urgent, pertinent reactions and responses to our political times with your Brexit or Brexit. I assume I'm within a safe audience. And yet again last year, turning back to your work with great sculptural ingenuity and making further destructions, but in the most positive of ways. For me, Michael's work reveals the excesses of the world, our relentless, troublesome, entangled relationship with commerce, with consumption, with greed, with waste, with destruction. But ultimately, it's incredibly positive and life-affirming. And as we'll see, there's a return constantly to humanity, to creativity, to these forces that really anchor us all. And I think in these ultimately very divided times only give us these wonderful glimpses of unity. It's a real honour to introduce Michael this evening, and I'm really looking forward to your words. I'd be very grateful if you would help me in giving him a very warm welcome. Thanks, Michael.
Hi, everyone. I thought I'd start just a few. I mean, this is Take Heart. This is like a TV program from the 1970s. Tony Hart, I'm sure, went on into the 2000s, but children's arts programs. But they had a thing called the Gallery, and I put my work into. I sent my work in. It was a scraper board of a clown made out of patterns, because in the 1970s there were a lot of wallpaper with quite garish patterns. I used to spend a lot of my time staring at it and creating figures out of it. So anyway, I made this silver kind of clown out of kind of various kind of patterns, and I sent it in, and it was accepted. And of course, the thing was that once it was accepted, you never got the artwork back. So I think that's probably where my slightly iconoclastic kind of thing started. So, it was shown in the gallery, but then they destroyed the work. So I think that's probably where it all started from this juncture. I'm just going to press the video, and hopefully it will work. Oh yeah. Oh.
Now it's time to see some of your own.
And there were only like 3 channels at that time. There was like ITV, BBC One, and BBC Two. And I remember sat in front of our television with my family, like staring at it in real time. And so that was kind of like the beginning. As a child, I used to do a lot of drawing. I spent a lot of time drawing. You put anything in front of me, I draw it. So I spent a lot of time drawing, but I was also an obsessive pattern maker. And so, and coming from a kind of working class background, I thought I'd get a job as a textile designer. And so that's what I went to do. I went to study textiles at Loughborough in the Midlands. And the first year you could carry on drawing. I kind of worked with a lot of kind of industrial patterning. But me in textiles, the second year you would have to specialize in printmaking, embroidery, weaving. And anyway, I left, and I tried to study, they called it fine art textiles at Goldsmiths, and they said they didn't want me. So then I tried to get into Goldsmiths to study fine art, and the ethos at Goldsmiths was that you kind of created your own course, really. It was left up to you, so it's a lot of responsibility placed on your shoulders. There was like, you would have to literally create your own course, which I really liked. But they rejected me the first time, and Lawrence was talking about Michael Craig Martin, and he was actually on the panel the first time I was rejected, and then I spent a year, and I came back the following year because it's the only course I really wanted to get on, because a lot of the others you'd have to specialize in painting or printmaking, and I didn't want to specialize in anything. I didn't want to define myself as anything. I just wanted to create fine art, and went back the following year, and it was Michael Craig Martin, and had the same portfolio as well. But for some reason, they accepted me the second year round because they said I made more sense. But I thought I'd just show you one or two of the two of my works that I made as a student, and this is from my degree show. Like Lawrence was saying, Michael Craig Martin, he also said that he was waiting for people like us to come along. Like us, because in somehow years just click, or a number of years just click, and it was a very small building, and you could see what everybody did within half an hour, and so because it was literally just a fine art course and a textile course, and this is one of my works from my degree show. And it has like clips underneath it, and so there's a lot of push and pull. And as a student, I was very interested in just making, like this would take me about 2 or 3 hours to make, and then you could never put it back again the way it was. So it would just kind of exist in that time, and then it was gone. So I was kind of interested in making fast things and with quite quick results at that juncture. And this is one of my other hanging pieces. Like Lawrence mentioned, Frieze, which was in 1988, which Damien Hirst, who's obviously from Leeds, he organised, and he found a building, he found like money for a catalogue from, we created the whole kind of, we didn't want to hang around really. We were young, and we didn't at that point of time, you would have to serve your apprenticeship. And then someone somewhere would maybe give you an exhibition, maybe 10 years down the road. But we decided that we were going to create our own situation. So we obviously created the work, but we also created the environment to put the work in, and we also sold the work as well. So, and that was sustainable for a while, but it's not something that I always try and encourage people. Art school to try and stick together after they leave, because you're all in the similar kind of situation, and that was like that for us. And we were lucky in some respects, coming from, like, you know, this is like Goldsmiths was situated in South London. There's a lot of empty spaces that one could squat or take over, or, you know, just abandoned manufacturing spaces that we could use. But at the same time, there was hardly any kind of real interest in contemporary art at that point of time. So that, I mean, that was the kind of situation we were up against, a kind of indifference. And so I left art school in 1988. I joined a gallery the last day of my degree show called Carson Schubert Limited, and you know, I didn't know what I was kind of getting myself involved in. I remember going to Cologne Art Fair, which was the main art fair at that juncture, and just thinking to myself, God, there's all these artists all around the world making art. And it hadn't really dawned on me that, because obviously you're just at the Millard building, which was Goldsmiths, and you're kind of in with your peers. And so this is a market, and so this is Building 1. And after Frieze in 1988, which is kind of like a group show, then Billy Selman and Carl Friedman is also from Leeds. They set up this space called Building 1, and they put on two kind of group exhibitions. One was called Gambler, and one was called Medicine. And the third iteration, and the last one, was my exhibition called Market, where I created like a totality, a whole market of like 100 different kind of individual pieces, but it was like one whole totality. And I liked the idea of it as being a kind of like it's kind of fluid material in some respects. So like one piece would like a market stall, which is the market stalls would like have tiers on it, but it also would be like a work piece. And at that point in time, I was interested in how things, like kind of realist in a sense. So they're kind of like they're copies, they're representations of something. And I was interested in like the real world as such, and how things were constructed in the real world. And so I kind of mimic the things I find around me, really. So, you know, like, so crates are designed to be stacked, so they kind of like columns, and they're only columns like on my height, so everything's kind of at a human scale. And it's my kind of homage, in a sense, to markets, really, like, which are kind of transitory things that, you know, I like the idea that you could take it all apart, because nothing's actually welded literally together. They're all in parts, and the boards are just on top of the actual steel armatures, and the grass just sits on it. So I like the idea that it could all just be taken apart and, you know, taken away. So I've always been interested in like details. I've been interested in like the macro and micro kind of details. So I'm interested in like temporary, large-scale things, but also in like very kind of microscopic things as well. So this is, I think, my homage, in a sense. I talk about it as my homage to, you know, because it's full of things, but it's not full of consumer durables. It's just full of the apparatus of display. And so it's full, but at the same time, it's empty, if you can believe that or not. And I had like these free appropriation videos, and you would see people putting out their street podiums, putting out their stalls in the morning. And so I was kind of like mimicking that, really. And so this is, so this is market. This is a market stall. And I sort of broke the things down into, this is like inverted crates upside down. So it's kind of very similar to what obviously one would see in a market. And the crates, the bread crates, because they're sunblessed bread crates, say like the sole property of Allied bakers would prosecute for retention or unauthorized use of this container. And because obviously students obviously use them to put their televisions on podiums, and they have people like driving around in vans who prosecute people for appropriating their crates. And I had to sign a caveat, because I had to buy all these crates, and I had to sign a kind of caveat to say that these crates would never go back to being like useful as in podiums. They would always remain as artworks. So it could never go back to being what their former use was. So they would always have to remain as artworks. That's a stack piece. and they collect pieces. So and that's a work piece, so that's like just a market stall that's been taken apart and pushed and up against the wall. And I like the idea that people would just walk around the space, and they could be nothing. There was no, like, you could be anywhere within the space, and that's what I liked about it. That it was completely uniformed in a way. And this is one of my appropriation pieces where I just had a fixed camera, and it just documented someone putting out their street podium in the morning. And this is Mr. Cruzon. It looks a bit like Joseph Beuys. And this is Mr. Cruzon's just retired, actually, and he's in Camberwell Green. And that was another one in East Dulwich. So I think that's kind of where a lot of the genesis to a lot of my concerns as an artist is literally from market, like value, the value we give to things, the value of like a crate, which is like invisible in the contemporary world, and just and worth. I think has also been of a concern of mine that appears in different ways. And so I think market was really about the idea that real goods exchanged between real people, as opposed to a kind of global sightless market, which that's my homage to those kind of markets that just appear for a short while and then disappear. And this is Costermonger's stall. This is 1993. I won't say very much about this. And that's another Costermonger's barrow. And then this is Carson Schubert Limited Gallery. Underneath that tarpaulin that says closing down sale, his name said Carson Schubert Limited. And this is my exhibition that I had in 1992. I never experienced like a real recession before, as like I left art school, and suddenly half of London looked like it was closing down. There were a lot of shops like festooned like this. So I pretended that our gallery was shutting down, so people would pass by in the street who would, it's like offices in Charlotte Street, and they would make comments about, oh, it's a real shame, because they used to poke fun at, they used to look into the big plate glass window and poke fun at what was, inside, and suddenly people going, oh, it's a real shame that the gallery shut down. So I was kind of interested in like reselling rubbish back to people in a sense. So I collected all this rubbish from various council tips and stuff that people had thrown out, piss-stained mattresses and old TV sets, and lots of consumer durables that people had like tossed aside. And then I collected all these shopping trolleys, and I festooned it with all these like sales slogans, and people. I had this like tape cassette recorder say, "Step inside, have a look round, please. Everything must go. Everything's been reduced, and everything's at a fraction of normal shop store prices." A lady come up to me a moment ago. She said to me, "Young man, how can you sell it so cheaply?" I said, "It's very simple, you see." I said, "It's a massive sale. It's a monster sale. It's a £100,000 clearance sale. It will not be repeated, and it will never be seen again. So do yourselves a favour, and everyone will get a bargain here. Don't be shy," because I was shy when I was a little girl, ladies and gentlemen. "Come inside, do yourselves a favour." So it goes on like that. But it went on for about it was constantly throughout the whole exhibition, the whole time. So it drove the people at the gallery crazy. So they used to, when I used to come into the gallery, it was playing, but they told me afterwards they used to switch it off when I left, because it would drive them around the bend. And so I think this is another idea about kind of value and worth, and that kind of all these consumer durables that had a use, and suddenly they've been thrown out. And I trying to revive them. So people would literally rummage, I'd appropriate all the shopping trolleys. I got them from Sainsbury's and Tesco's, and just kind of festoon them in these signs. Too late will be the cry. The bargains you have wanted have passed you by. So. And this is Run for Your Life. This is a group exhibition at City Racing, which was an artist-run space in 1993. And this is a kind of precursor for Breakdown and all the kind of pictograms and things that I was collecting at that particular point of time. And I just literally drew it on a wall with a felt tip pen. And this is what Lawrence was talking about, Scrap Heap Services. And between 1993 and 1995, I worked on Scrap Heap Services. By this juncture, I'd probably left Carson Schubert Limited, so I was working. I was kind of working and also job working to create money, but also creating my own kind of college industry, which also employed me, called Scrap Heap Services. And as Lawrence talked about, it's like my fictitious cleaning company that it said on the video promotional thing, we leave the scum with no place to hide. And at that juncture in this country, we were going from a kind of manufacturing base to more kind of retail leisure base, and there were lots of industries being shut down, and a lot of people, from my way of thinking, were kind of just being thrown literally on the scrap heap, and whole communities being shut down. And Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, and that's when I left school. And the idea was that actually, also when I come up to kindness, they said that it was the end of the Kindly Society when Margaret Thatcher came to power as well. So anyway, so I came up with this idea of this cleaning company that would literally get rid of people who no longer played a useful role in life. And I made all these little figures out of rubbish for about 2 years. I collect the rubbish and I hand make these little cutout figures. And then that's me in my kind of Scrap Heap Services uniform. And so that's the first edition that I made. I made additions to try and raise money for the actual installation. So I remember phoning an art dealer, and I was very shy. They called me Blandy at art school because I didn't actually say anything. And so like the idea that I would actually go on the phone and actually speak to someone about and try and sell them something was like, and then they said yes. If they'd said no, I think I'd have been devastated. But because they said yes, so somehow that gave me the impetus to carry on. And at that time, I was very serious about this. It was all-consuming, this project, for me at this juncture. I mean, it was a tableau, in a sense, and the actual heap symbolized the loss of human potential. The shipper shredder at the back was a vulture, and vulture lives on carrion and on waste. And like Lawrence said, I showed this at Minneapolis first in a group exhibition called Brilliant, and then I showed it at the Electric Press Building, which at that time was an abandoned, former press, I guess, in 1996. And I think the Institute managed to get us a short lease on the space and put on Scrap Heap Services there. And then I showed it again, because in a Chisenheld Gallery, and this is at the Chisenheld Gallery, which is like a white floor and had a kind of stove enamel signs about what the world would look like if we got rid of all those people black spots, as I called them, at that particular point of time. And so, like I said, I had a promotional video, and this is one of my other additions. I had a whole range of additions to just raise money for the larger installation. And at that juncture, this is a drawing, because I didn't draw at Goldsmiths. It didn't seem the time to draw, so I only really started to draw after I left. So Scrap Heap Services and Run for Your Life were the first drawings I really made after Goldsmiths. As I can't remember, there weren't that many people who drew, and they certainly weren't life drawing. So I spent like 2 years on my foundation course life drawing. I drew a lot, but at that time I decided not to draw, and so this is I sold Scrap Heap Services to the Tate, and it was the first time, materially speaking, I was ahead in my life. I had my own flat, had a car, had my Richard James suit, and I sat at the table one day and I thought, what was this struggle about? And then it popped into my head I was going to destroy all my worldly belongings. And that was probably 96, 97, and then it took me till 2001 to do that, because I went on and off the project, and I looked at various ways that one could do it, and like I said, so, you know, this is like 7 to 9 Fashion Street, Michael Landy at home, so this is where I used to live, and my bedroom was behind the blue crates, and I put on an exhibition. There were like 17 drawings in the exhibition, and each one is a kind of like a diary, like Scrap Heap Services was like a diary. I like to catalogue things. I would catalogue each stage of this idea about how one could destroy all your worldly belongings. So each one was a kind of sort of set in time where I'd kind of explore the idea, and then I would get sidetracked onto something else. So anyway, I decided to put on this exhibition to try and raise interest, to see if anyone was interested in this notional idea about me destroying all my worldly belongings. So I put on the exhibition where I used to live, and I was like literally behind the red crates making this collage of all the information that I collected about recycling and consumerism at that juncture. So I was on show for the first time, and and over the years, one way or another, I either become the kind of voice piece for my work, or I become part of the work, in a sense. And I think it's probably the first time where I actually become part of the work, because, you know, people would come in, you know, I'd be busy sticking things down, and maybe get into a conversation. The crates are the sole property of Michael Landy, who will prosecute for the retention or unauthorized use of this crate. So like 2,000 crates made as well. I think they forgot the D in unauthorized the first time they did them. It was up like 6 flights of steps as well, so we had to take them all down and bring the whole new lot up. But anyway, so at this juncture, I got into a conversation with James Lingwood from Art Angel, and Art Angel commissioned artists to do public artworks, and talked to James about, because but before that, I mean, I didn't like converse very much in the ideas were my ideas, and they were sacrosanct, and so someone like broaching into my ideas, and we're having a conversation about, I found that difficult at the beginning, because I wasn't, but what came out of that actually was very beneficial, and as before I was kind of closed off, and so, but open up this kind of conversation about how one could do it, because my initial idea was going to be more like a tableau, like Scrap Heap Services, and then because the whole performative side, I hadn't really, it kind of, it's a kind of language I wasn't really well versed in, and so that's what we started to talk about to make it more performative. That's the sole property of Michael Landy. So like 2,000 milk crates, which is quite a job once we came to destroy them. 2,000 milk crates. And this is the consuming paradox, which I was talking about. It's like an 8 by 10 collage where I just literally stuck all the information because I started to look at material reclamation facilities, and material reclamation facilities take things of worth out of the waste stream. So identifying, sorting, and separating, they're kind of like recycling techniques. So I went to various conventions, exhibitions. You know, I was kind of well versed in kind of recycling at that juncture in this country, and I decided to base my breakdown, which I eventually called it. It was originally Michael Landy's lifestyle breakdown, obviously breakdown of stuff, but also a psychological played on the idea of a psychological breakdown. Oh, am I going the wrong way, aren't I? So, yeah, so press that. And so this is, can you hear me, or can you hear me? Yeah, so, and this is like just a 26-second clip of a camera person making their way round breakdown. And so it's like a scalemetric set, and it's like two figures of 8, and it would take like one object about 10 minutes to travel round the actual facility. So, I mean, it's a kind of a big jump from 2006, 2007, when I came up with the original idea, to the C&A building on Oxford Street in 2001. But, I mean, by chance, C&A, some of you will know, of a certain age will know C&A, were literally retail shop, kind of clothing retail company, were leaving this country, and their flagship store was on Oxford Street, and so it was kind of perfect timing for us. And James Lingwood, director of Art Angel, managed to convince them to give us the space, because obviously when people go on Oxford Street, they go there to shop, to consume things. They don't go there to witness someone destroying all their worldly belongings. But that's what happened. I mean, at the time, I talked about it as being an examination of consumerism, and it was my ultimate consumer choice. And I rationalized it as a child. I used to like taking things apart, and I couldn't necessarily put them back together again, but I used to like taking them apart to understand how things were made. So this was just like a grown-up version of that, in a sense, because, I mean, beyond the veneer of consumerism and consumption, that, you know, I kind of want to see how these things are made, and to have a kind of greater understanding about why consumerism at this juncture is the number one ideology of our time. So, so I put, 50,000 people came to see it over a 2-week period. We had shopping hours, like, you know, from 10 till 6, and maybe late nights on Wednesday. And we opened the doors to the public. And of course, it's not in a gallery. It's not in a, you know, it's not in a museum space. So, you know, we have consumers come along, and people shopping, and they would just come in and get closer to the actual conveyor belt, and then, you know, pick up a leaflet, and they start to read about it. And because some people thought we were actually selling things, you know, quite a lot of stuff we had. The things we had stolen, probably, because a lot of things get stolen on Oxford Street anyway, was probably at the Private View, which says a lot about the art world, because they stole, obviously, art world souvenirs. And but the way I talked about it was, people would come up to it and they would look in the trays, and then it would reflect back on them, in a sense, and people would think about their own habits about consuming, and what one would do if you go into a burning fire. You know, what would you pull out? It's not normally the VCR. It's normally, you know, the family photographs, or you know, the more sentimental things. But, you know, I created an inventory, like Lawrence mentioned, like 7,227 items at the age of 37. So it's like my biography, in a sense, as a consumer. But like, not all my things. Like, you know, I destroyed my Saab 900 car, but then I destroyed my old love letters. I destroyed family pictures. I destroyed artworks. I destroyed VCRs. I destroyed my bike. I destroyed things that had fallen off my VCR, a black bit of rubber that I didn't quite know what it was. But everything got itemized. Everything got a number. And we wrote out these procedural guidelines. So everything was done in a very laborious way. So everything got broken down into its material parts. And so we had like procedural guidelines that my 12 operatives had to follow. And like I said, it was based on a material reclamation facility. So we had like an electrical department where they would just break down my electrical things. We played because I'm from a generation where we had vinyl, so we played my music throughout the whole exhibition. So that kind of gave it a more kind of workable kind of atmosphere. And, you know, we were like, it was like a disassembly line, but a production line, but in reverse, where you're literally seeing things taken apart in front of you. So people would see the object traveling in a little yellow tray as an object, but then would be, and then they would see it as it had been taken apart. So I talked about it as being the happiest 2 weeks of my life, but also also like witnessing my own death. So it was, so it had a kind of, it had a sort of dual role. But for me as an artist, making things and doing things, like I've done exhibitions where no one's talked to me about it afterwards, or so it might, in some respects it might never have existed. But I mean, some people talked about Breakdown being a spectacle, which it was a spectacle in some respects, but it was. But people really wanted to talk about it, and they wanted to talk about it as we were breaking things down. And so that's what I found really interesting, was what people brought to it, in a sense. And we could have spent the whole 2 weeks just talking about it, And I also knew, like from being Blandy, that I would have to fess up and become the spokesperson about what we're doing. So I took on this persona where I would actually talk to people and talk about the theories and the ideas behind the work, and that's how I really liked it. That people would really talk about it and got very. Some people thought it was complete waste. Could have given it away or given it to charity. But I said, it's my ultimate consumer choice, and I wanted to literally break down all my worldly belongings in front of people and for people to witness it. And there was nothing else they couldn't consume anything. So that's the only thing they could consume was the actual experience, and that's what I was really interested in. Me was the actual experience. This is my dad's sheepskin coat. It's like C714. C was for clothing, P was for perishable, A was obviously for artwork, MV was for motor vehicle, F was for furniture, R was for reading. So because like I said, we created this inventory of all my worldly possessions, which people could actually read on the wall as well. But this is my father's sheepskin coat, which I'll move on to my father in a while. But this is like one of the last things we actually destroyed. And this is the inventory I was talking about. So literally everything got catalogued, everything got a number. So I destroyed all my worldly belongings in a 2-week period, like 5.75 tons of it, and that got buried in a landfill site in Essex, apart from the stuff that was stolen at the private view by the art world. And so I created this list, and then this is a slight aside, but then because the document was never finished, because I was still getting things in my possession, obviously during the whole 2 weeks we were performing Breakdown, and so I eventually show it as show the actual document, and this is an exhibition I had in New York in 2017. And so we actually, destroying your worldly belongings is a very expensive business, so I actually went over budget. So instead of I ended up with nothing, I actually ended up in the red, which is a very contemporary situation. And so I ended up with debts. And then, because originally we were going to have 12 works, 12 shred my birth certificate and whatever, and we're going to have it in a Perspex case and sell it to someone and get the money back for the production costs because we've gone over the budget. But at the last minute, I decided I wasn't going to do that. And then it was going to compromise the whole thing. So I ended up, the debt coming onto me, which meant, so it wasn't very Zen-like that I'd end up with zero. I ended up in the red. And these, I made a couple of drawings after Breakdown, just some of the stuff that people sent me. Someone sent me an iPod. Someone took me to Gap to buy me some clothes. It's just kind of stuff that people sent me, or cards that were given to me within. Someone gave me a Paul Weller CD within 2 seconds of me finishing destroying everything, and I felt like I couldn't say no because it would have felt a bit churlish, so I had to accept it. And but I mean, my idea was the artwork was it wasn't a way of life in a sense, even though one could see it as that. My whole thing was to just put this on for people to witness and to absorb. I mean, we had people from lots of different religious denominations come in as well. So I mean, and then if you ever destroy your worldly belongings, then I found it very difficult to move on, creatively speaking, for about a year. And then I started to notice these little stoical plants growing in gaps in the side of the street, on the side of buildings. They obviously on junk heaps, the side of railway tracks, and they're weeds. And a weed is a plant out of place. Gardeners hate them; they see them as a nuisance. But and obviously, I talked about 50,000 people came to see Breakdown, so it was like a big self-exposure, and so I withdrew back to what I remember as a child. So it's just me, like an etching tool, a plate, and a live plant, because I used to dig these plants up at the side of the street or whatever. And and etch them, because etching tool is a very thin needle and you just make marks on this plate. And then, so you're kind of keeping the plant in its soil, and it's budding, and there's insects running across it, and so they're annuals, perennials. They have like wonderful names, but I really like them because they don't really need us to survive. They don't need moisture much. They don't need pampering. They're entrepreneurial. They'll just find ways to exist, and so I thought they were kind of great signs of life in a sense, and a great sense of renewal. This is nipplewort, and this is shepherd's purse. This is like one of the first plants that I etched. And shepherd's purse, it has very distinctive petals, and it's also called mother's heart because children used to play games with each other. They'd pull the seed pod and it would break. The seed pod would break out into the child's palm of his hands, and they'd say, "Oh, look, you've broken your mother's heart." So it has, and they obviously have medicinal purposes as well. This is bristly ox tongue, and common auroch, I think it is. And so I did a whole suite of etchings, which would have been over like 4 seasons really. And an etching needle, it just, as I was saying, it just makes very delicate marks. So, and I was talking a bit before, I like to catalogue and document things. So, I picked all the tools for breakdown. So I like detail, and I like to document things, and I like and diaries. So for me, it's about getting as much information down about this plant as I possibly can, and that can be in a drawing, but it can be on the side of a house. It can be something to do with scrap heap services. So what drawing has taught me is about detail and looking really, and that's how you kind of get to know about the contemporary world, what it looks like, how it's formed. This is mayweed, scentless mayweed. And like I said, my father's sheepskin coat. So in 2002, I guess it was, the Tate Britain asked me to put on an exhibition at the Devine Galleries, and it's like a neoclassical space. And you have like the North Devine, the South Devine, and the octagon in the middle. And so I remember they gave me this like map, and then I went away to think about what I could do. And my father was a tunnel miner, Irish. My father's Irish, and it's the one. I used to go and visit my parents, but it's like quite a long story. But my father had an industrial accident in Northumberland. He was, he's digging underground, and the earth fell on him, and he remembers being buried alive, and he was looking at the roots of the tree above his head as he was being buried alive. But this chap ran in and pulled him out, but he had spinal injuries. So anyway, so I get a bit choked up about that bit. But anyway, so it's the one thing I couldn't articulate as an artist, but it's also probably the thing that formed me, probably that accident, and for my whole family in a way, formed my interest in worth and value. And obviously, it doesn't just go for a crate or a weed. It's also about human beings as well. So anyway, so my father had this accident at the age of 37 back in 1977, and he was never able to work again. And so I decided I was going to become artist in residence at our family home in Essex, 62 Kingswood Road, Goodmayes, Ilford, Essex, IG3 8UD. And so I just sat as I used to as a child, and I started to draw my father, first of all. I thought, because I hadn't really spent very much time at home for years. And so I started to draw him, because he was obviously used to me when I was a child to draw him. So that's how it began, really. And then I ensconced myself there for about a year, I think it was. I was a right nuisance, but anyway. So anyway, the story is like my father, because my father gives me permission to get all these medical notes from the NHS, like sort of really from cradle to grave. So I get all this information about him and about the accident, and I remember the nurse saying that my dad had big shoulder muscles, because my dad was in traction for about 6 months because of this industrial accident. And 27, 28 years later, and I'm looking at a man and his muscles have all withered away, as my dad had these big neck muscles because he would literally be cutting into the earth with a hydraulic spade. And so it's very manual work, stuff that, nobody really wants to do anymore. But that gave my father his sense of himself, in a sense. And this is, so I start to draw his scars. So this is like a bypass that he had. It's called bypass as well. That he had one of the operations he had because he had like a lot of peripheral vascular condition and claudication. This is called claudication because so the man, I was like in front of me is, the only jobs, because he was written off basically. So and so the only jobs he's allowed to he can maintain are jobs around the house. And so he does Dad does kind of DIY around the house. But even then his condition starts to worsen. So he's unable to do that. This is called Singing of the Fairies. It's my dad's hand. But Singing of the Fairies, it's like underground when the wood contracts or expands. It makes a crackling sound, and they call it Singing of the Fairies. And so my idea, eventually it dawned on me that in some respects my father becomes the house in a sense, and that, like I said, the only jobs he can really do are jobs around the house, and it has his physical ability declines, then also the house starts to decline. The paint starts to fade. The paint peels. The house starts to dilapidate, and so I come up with the idea of creating my family house. It's like a one-to-one house at the Devines. So in the south Devines, the front of the house, and in the north Devines is the rear of the house. And then I had like back screen projections of videos from the interior of the house. So and it was like, luckily my mum and dad bought this house back in the late 60s, and it just about fitted in the in Tate, because there was only about 1.5 meters either side that you could walk round it. And so it was on for about 6 months. So I used to drive past the Tate when it was shut, think, oh, my mum and dad's house is in there. And so it had like real pebble dashing. Mike Smith, who fabricated it, the only thing he couldn't do was the ancient art of pebble dashing. So we had to get like real pebble dashers in. So I like the idea of this like neoclassical sculptural gallery suddenly has this kind of post-war house with its UPVC windows and its pebble dashing. And then and I made an inventory of, I took lots of pictures of the exterior of our house, because that's how you kind of suddenly, you notice that my dad has put a bit of blue tack on the doorbell to stick it in its place. And that's kind of what makes it your house, in a sense, those kind of slight, kind of human kind of articulations. This work was called semi-detached, because, the house was also semi-detached. And this is this is like the view from the Octagon Gallery, where I made, like I said, 3 films about, and this is the first one. And that's my dad whistling, and my dad had collected all these DIY images from like the 1960s to like the 2000s. So it's like my dad whistling to his favorite country and western music, and obviously with each note the image would change. So it's like, whistle while you work kind of feel into it. And this is another work which is called Shelf Life. My father, in his bedroom, he had this shelf, and it was like his own self-portrait of himself as a maker and doer. And I put in a motion control camera inside the bedroom, and it would look at the shelf in great detail, in a sense. So it was like, you could kind of choreograph the moves. It went on for about an hour, and on the shelf there was this piece of dust, because the only thing my mum wasn't allowed to dust was this shelf, and it had all my dad's like DIY stuff, like still encapsulated in cases and in boxes. And there's a piece of fluff, I remember, underneath the shelf. And when my mum put on the central heating, it would dance because it's like an accumulation of dust. And I got very fixated with that piece of dust. And that's the actual rear of the house. And that's the actual shelf. It's called Shelf Life. Then I made a whole set of drawings called Welcome to My World. It's after my dad's favourite singer was a guy called Jim Reeves. And I made a whole set of drawings about the shelf and some of the objects around the shelf. So it's a squashed moth that I found. That's a dead dragonfly that I found in the porch. And these are just like various kind of objects, just watercolor pencil, color drawings. I had never really worked with color before. And so it's kind of, I was always kind of black and white kind of drawing. That's the Pekingese dog that we used to have. And that's the kind of Barbie comb with my dad's hair, because my niece, she left her Barbie comb behind her, and my dad used it as a brush. And then this is a bit of a jump. This is me, and it's a radical orchidectomy of the left testes because I had testicular cancer. So I drew that as well. Like I said, I draw most things in front of me. So that's in 2005 or 4, I think, as well. And that's another one. In 1982, I saw an exhibition of Jean Tinguely, Swiss kinetic artist, makes stuff out of junk. When I was still a student at Loughborough studying textiles. And I came away, well, I'd never seen people laugh or be happy in the gallery before. His works are very interactive. You know, you put your foot on the foot pedal and these sculptures come to life. But this is his artwork. This is like 1960, called Homage to New York, and it's like one of the first kind of action, not action, sorry, what's the right word, but it's a 27-foot, 23-foot sculpture that he made in New York, and it was his reaction to visiting New York for the first time. And this is in the grounds of the Museum of Modern Art, Sculpture Garden, and he just collected all this junk from all over New York. And he built this sculpture, and it performed for like 27 minutes on the evening of the 17th of March, 1960. And it had like about 100 kind of wheels. And Tinguely was all about kind of flux. He didn't like things being static. He liked things that moved, and he talked about it being like life itself. It's always changing. So I'm losing my voice. Why don't give me a chance? And ultimately, in the end, like most of Tinguely's things, they don't work. So in the end, it's like you saw that chap just running towards the camera, but it was the New York Fire Brigade eventually destroyed the work. But it has this kind of, because the people who came to witness it at the time, you know, all those years ago, apart from what I really liked about it was the connection, because I saw this image in a Rosalind Krauss book called Passages of Sculpture, and it kind of triggered something to me about Homage to New York, that Homage to New York ended up in the dumps of New Jersey, and my worldly possessions ended up in a landfill site in Essex. So, and he talked about it, people just come along and experience it, and it was the experience that they came away with them, apart from the bits that people literally took away as souvenirs for Tinguely sculpture at the end, because there's a radio sequence where you can actually hear people literally pulling up bits of the sculpture at the end, and Tinguely signs it and they take it away as souvenirs. And I put an advert, because I make a documentary about Homage to New York, and I put an advert in Art Forum asking for people to contact me if they've got one of these fragment or artifacts from Homage to New York. And that's me with my head on his shoulders, so that's obviously Tinguely, but I've chopped his head off and put my own head on there. But anyway, going back to 1982, so I mean, it was really, because I was about 17 or 18 at that juncture, and had a really profound effect on me, because I was riding one of the machines, and I came away with one of his Metamatic abstract drawings that one of the machines made, and I came away with a catalogue and a poster, and also just to fit that kind of, I remember feeling very euphoric after that, and that kind of feeling stayed with me. I make some fake fragments as well. That's like his baby's bassinet and sort of radio flyer, which I think is like some kind of American wagon, and make all these fake fragments from Homage to New York as well. And that's a washing machine drum. And I make all these drawings around Homage to New York, and this is obviously the sculpture with a lot of the sculptures that were in the Museum of Modern Art Sculpture Gardens. Tangley at the last minute decided to paint the sculpture white. So that balloon at the top was a weather balloon, and that was supposed to burst at the end, but that didn't work, and there's various contraptions that was supposed to work, didn't work. Robert Rauschenberg made a money thrower, which I think did work. It was like these silver coins that sprang out at a certain point during the performance. So, you know, it took, I think it like 2 weeks to create this whole sculpture. You could never do that now. The Museum of Modern Art you could never do that. Just turn up and say, could I put on a kinetic sculpture in your sculpture garden? That would never happen now. And this is another one of the drawings. These drawings are a bit like my scraper board. They're oil stick, and there's like a black ground, and I put another white ground on top, and then I inscribe into it with paint sticks, the back end of paint sticks, and that's Suicide Carriage, that kind of thing there, because that's the only thing that really exists. One of the fragments from Homage to New York, because that was supposed to drown itself in Mayol's The River, and Mayol was a contemporary of Rodin. That's that naked figure there. It was supposed to fall in the river and drown itself, but it breaks down, so in the end it ends up in the collection of the Museum of Art. This is just on my drawings. That's a correction fluid drawing. So I draw it, but I mean the main idea is for me, because I want to remake the sculpture, only for it to destroy itself. That's really, I mean, I make all these drawings, but the main thing I was really interested in is to recreate the sculpture only for it to destroy itself all over again. These are some no-frills works that I made. No-frills sculpture, no-frills painting. It's the only painting I ever made. No-frills drawing and no-frills print. And then in 2007, I'd like to say, it's probably a bit made up, but anyway, as Lawrence mentioned, it was in my empty studio. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to draw myself. So I got a mirror and put a piece of paper up and really just looked into my face, and that's what I started to do. So that, I mean, the first thing I drew was obviously myself as a self-portrait, and then I went on to draw about 90 people. I called it like in your face, because I was literally in people's faces. Each piece of paper was like 50 by 70 centimeters Fabriano. I always just use a HB pencil, no necks, just heads. And that's Carl Friedman. So that's Carl from Leeds, originally from Leeds. And so you can see how close I am with, I would spend 2 days drawing people, but like, I would always start with their right eye, and it's literally in people's faces. With people, you know, it's not like they gave me a photograph of themselves and they went away. I was, you know, so it's like also about spending time with people as well. So, I mean, I drew my whole family at first. It's all my family. It's my sister, John, nephews and nieces. And so I went on to draw about, I think it's about 90 people altogether. And the thing with weeds, they don't talk to you, but then I had to learn to teach myself to talk and draw, because I hadn't done, like, I thought people would be respectful of the artist and they would just sit still, though. No, they wanted to talk to me, and it's like, I can't, and then I learned to talk and draw, which is also a huge step for me. And this is Art Bin. So, I mean, like I mentioned about destruction of artwork, which the art world picked up on, was that I destroyed my own artwork, but also my friends' artwork. And in this country, artworks become under property laws. So you can actually, ironically, you can actually destroy artwork, but you can't show it in a deflammatory way. You can't show it upside down you can't change its color, but ironically, you can destroy it if you're the owner of, say, the artwork. So anyway, at some point, I wanted to revisit the whole idea about iconoclasm, and I put on an exhibition called Art Bin. I used to have these because it was also a trademark as a student going to Loughton in Essex. I used to have all my tools in one of these things called an art bin. So I decided we're going to put on, I was going to create this ginormous bin made out of polycarbonate at the South London Art Gallery. It's like 600 square meters of bin, and it's about 5 meters high, 8 meters wide, 15 meters long. And I talked about it as being, as an artist, that I wanted to create a monument to failure, of like creative failure. So I asked artists and also people who owned artworks to throw their art into this bin. And I said it could be a technical failure or intellectual failure, or finding whatever way you see it being a failure. And so it's a kind of like a celebration of failure. And then we had like a kind of a walkway that people could walk up and throw their artwork in. So as you can see, the bin filled up the whole of the South London Art Gallery. This is like in 2010. And I asked, well-known artists, Sunday painters, art students, it's open to everyone to throw their work in the bin. And so that's kind of what we did over a 6-week period. So it changed every day as obviously more things came in, would get thrown on, things would get broken up. And I like to see it as the first curated art bin. And people would also put it on their CV as an exhibition they were in as well. So over you had to fill in a form because you had to say that you were the actual author of the artwork, because the gallery couldn't be seen to destruction of art. So you had to be the author or had got the author's permission to actually destroy it. So this went on for about 6 weeks. So I think that was at the Private View, which was more like a public flogging or hanging from the 18th century, where people would say like lob it in and it's rubbish. And so I did an art bin in Yokohama in Japan, and it was much more ritualistic. There was no one shouting, "That's a load of rubbish, chuck it in." It says a lot about us. That's Adam Ant. Adam Ant, people who are of a certain age will know what Adam Ant is. But Adam Ant came on the last day and made a collage and threw it in. So like I said, it was a celebration of failure, and it would literally change every day as new things would get thrown into the bin. Damien Hirst, young people like Preston knows, is up against polycarbonate because they've got their hands on the skull painting that could change their whole lives. Julian Opie, that's a cast of my head. And like I said, this is a machine created to destroy the Tingley Museum, or Tangley Museum, or Tingwali Museum, as some people call him. And it's just a little collage taken from various catalogues from Tangley. So, because that chap who is self-constructing, self-destroying sculpture in 1960, suddenly they built a museum called the Tangley Museum in Basel. And I couldn't get my head around that young man in 1960, and then years later, suddenly he has like a museum in his name. So I thought I'd break into the Tangley Museum, cannibalize all these sculptures, and then sell it to destroy the Tangley Museum, which never happened. Well, not so far anyway. And this is a credit card destroying machine, and this is actually a commission for Louis Vuitton. And so I decided I wanted to make a machine to destroy all the fake Louis Vuitton bags. And it would be like an amnesty. People would bring their fake Louis Vuitton bags to Louis Vuitton, and we'd shred it in the windows, but they decided to say no to that. And so I came up with this idea of making a credit card destroy machine. And because the other thing I talked about market, I'm kind of interested in exchange. And so people would give up their credit card, and as an exchange, people would get a Metamatic because I made one of Tangley's Metamatic drawing machines. So you put your foot on the pedal and it makes one of these drawings. So you'd get an abstract drawing, but then we'd shred your credit card. And we destroyed about 450 because I showed it at Frieze Art Fair, and we destroyed about 450 during Frieze Art Fair. And this is one of the drawings, so that's why I was talking earlier on when I saw his show in 1982, one of the drawings that I took away, which obviously I subsequently destroyed in 2001. This is Dean Robotham, so I'm just going to take a slug of water. And there's an exhibition at the British Museum called Medals of Dishonour. David Smith made some medals about, I think it was the First or Second World War, sorry, I can't quite recollect. But anyway, the British Museum asked some artists to make some contemporary medals of dishonour. And at that point in time, the Blair government had come up with the idea of antisocial behavioural orders. And so I got hold of the first person who was given one of these orders, and his name was Dean Robotham. And these are obviously some of his misdemeanors that Dean had done, and they also made a brochure of him with his photograph on it. So he had kind of a certain amount of notoriety where he came from, but obviously the kids converted like these ASBOs into, the more ASBOs you got, the more street cred you had. So it's like that idea about something being recycled. And this is what Lawrence was talking about. It's my Acts of Kindness project that was on the London Underground Central Line, where I asked the travelling public to send in their everyday acts of kindness, because one of the other things that obviously I'm interested in is the everyday, and I talk about acts of kindness as people think we were kind as there were some halcyon days back in the 1950s when we had more of a community and people were more kinder to each other. So I wanted to celebrate those everyday acts of kindness that you see and witness on the tube in London, because obviously people think London's a very unfriendly place. But, you spend enough time there, you start to see people giving up their seat or saying a few kind words to someone, or you see someone crying on the tube and someone gives them a hug. And so I wanted to say you don't have to be superhuman or a saint to be kind. And it's that idea of a kind of emotional bridge you build between you and an absolute stranger. So it's that kind of emotional bridge that you will never see that person again. So it's a kind of setup, and the actual stories appeared on the platforms on the Central Line and on the tubes, or on some of the tubes on the Central Line as well. So, yeah. So it's just one of the kind of other things that I'm kind of interested in. And then I did another Acts of Kindness project, but in CBD in Sydney in 2017, where I draw the CBD, Central Business District, and then similar idea. I asked members of the public to send in their everyday acts of kindness, and I make this this map that people could walk on. It was also a jigsaw puzzle at Martin's Place, which is kind of in the central area by their memorial to Anzac. And then I have like 200 stories, these jigsaw puzzle pieces around the CBD. That's me, self-portrait as a rubbish bin. That's bronze. That's like a bronze bin. And then as I was throwing artworks in Art Bin, I got a call from the National Gallery, and they said, did I want to become artist in residence at the National Gallery? I thought it was a hoax, so I had to go and meet them. But apparently it was genuine. And I was there for about 3 years. And so, as I was saying, I was resident artist at my mum and dad's house, and then I become resident artist at the National Gallery. They called it like associate artist at National. So you not actually the artist in residence, you're associate. So it's like this, you become like a bastard child that they're a bit embarrassed about. And this is the first, I don't paint, like I mentioned, I think maybe earlier on. And of course, 99.9% of the National Gallery's collection is painting. And so I never really spent any time there. So I spent the first year, it must be, just looking at all the paintings. And this is El Greco, Christ driving the traders from the temple. And I think it's one of the first things that kind of caught my eye. and I make like various. I start to copy things not from the actual paintings, but I get postcards because I have a studio downstairs at the National Gallery, and I start to draw things from the postcards. It's Suzanne the Bathers. And then I start, and this is Dosso Dossi. It's only a very small painting, Lamentation over the Body of Christ. It's like the Three Marys. And I make it into like a 2-meter high drawing made out of a watercolor pencil. And this is me as St. Jerome, because as I'm wandering around, I'm making lists of things. And one of the first things I noticed was there seemed to be a lot of, I spend a lot of time in the Renaissance section. I end up looking at, I start making notes, and as I come back to the studio, I start to notice that there's a lot of St. Catherine wheels in the collection. So I become interested in that, first of all. I think that's kind of what drew me in, first of all. And then all this Christian iconography, and I was brought up a Catholic, and so I become very interested in this Christian iconography as people, before people could read or write, they knew their saints. So there's like, they knew like St. Stephen had like 3 stones on his shoulders and 1 on his head to symbolize that he was the first Christian martyr. And this is St. Jerome. This is my studio space at the National Gallery. And St. Jerome is a doctor of the church. You'll always see him transcribing the Bible, and sometimes he's an old man with a rock and he beats his chest with a rock. So they're kind of like they're Christian martyrs. And then a martyr is a witness to the Christian faith, as a confessor isn't a martyr. And St. Francis is a confessor, and St. Francis gives up all his worldly belongings. He comes from a rich background, and he gives up all his worldly belongings he just gives them all away and gives himself up to the church naked. And this is St. Francis. It's a painting by Sasetta, getting his stigmatas from a seraph. A seraph is an angel, and so this is what I become interested in. It's this kind of Christian iconography. I start making drawings about it and collages, and like I said, because the National Gallery are there for the conservation and preservation of artworks, and so I want, from like I said, as a 17-year, 18-year-old, that feeling that I had, I kind of wanted to recreate for the National Gallery. So I make these kinetic saints. The exhibition was eventually called Saints Alive. That's all the stigmatas in the National Gallery. And this is the actual painting you just saw. But I obviously, and it's like a grab from a fairground ride, and when you pick up the soft, cuddly toys, so it's just converted from that. And then I have poverty, chastity, obedience is what you could win once you put your hand on the pedal, and that arm goes into St. Francis, and it's poverty, chastity, obedience are Franciscan orders, and when there's a book called The Golden Legend, which is basically all the stories about the saints, and and this is St. Apollonia. It's a Lucas Crank, the older painting. There's only 2 St. Apollonias at the National Gallery, and she's a patron saint of dentists, and she's also a virgin martyr. So the Romans torture her by extracting her teeth out, because they always want you to convert to their pagan gods, but Christian martyrs never do that. So eventually it kind of leads to their death. And this is the sculpture that I made, the kind of kinetic sculpture that I made of Saint Apollonia. And you put your foot on the foot pedal, and then her arms come up, and she bashes herself in the face. And she's holding a pair of pliers, and the tooth is at the end, because that's how you tell who Saint Apollonia is by her holding a pair of pliers, and there's always a tooth at the end. And she's also the patron saint of dentists, ironically. So she kind of, as the exhibition goes on, the paint starts to break down because she keeps hitting herself in the face, and then eventually the fiberglass breaks down as well. And some of my collages of various saints and drawings that I made. And this is St. Michael, who I'm named after, and he slays the devil. He's also the weigher of souls, and he's also patron saint of bankers. And but it's a Carlo. I walked into the National Gallery to show it, so I knew about the place, and there was a whole room of painter I'd never heard of called Carlo Crivelli. And then, ironically, like about a year or two later, I based a lot of the sculptures on the Carlo Crivelli paintings, and this is multi-saint, and so it's like various like cogs, and you know, you put your foot on the foot pedal, and that fires up the motor, and the whole thing starts to animate. The chap on top is can't remember his name, damn. But anyway, the griddle is St. Lawrence, and the chap with the sword in his head is, I can't remember. But anyway, okay. But and that's the Cima painting from St. Jerome, and he beat, because he has sexual hallucinations. So to take his mind off that, he beats his chest with a rock, and he's a hermit, and his best friend is a lion because he pulls the form from the lion's paw, so they become best friends. But like I said, he's also a doctor of the church, the 4 doctors, and he transcribes the Bible. And that's my St. Jerome. So he literally beats his chest. Sometimes, like I was saying, the conservation and preservation and national, sometimes that rock would fly across the room, or it would break down, or because Canelic sculptures are notoriously unreliable. And this is my St. Jerome. The chest is from a Di Roberti painting. The arm is from a Cosimo Tura painting. So it's a bit like Frankenstein's monsters as well. I take kind of fragments from various paintings, and it's a 2-dimensional thing, so I have to make them 3-dimensional. So you have to kind of change it a little bit. Otherwise, obviously, when a painter paints something, he doesn't think someone's going to come along years later and make it into a sculpture. So you have to make sure that it stands up. So I become, interested in attributes. The attributes. So that's how you can tell one saint from another saint. This is the incredulity of Thomas, and it's another Cima painting. That's Thomas, putting his finger into Christ's side, because he's obviously been resurrected. And this is my sculpture where you put your foot on the foot pedal, and it's like, so it's more like a boxing bag in a sense. So things are quite violent. They break down, bits fall off, and this is Botticelli, and that's St. Francis thinking about Christ's suffering, and that's a donation box I make out of that particular painting, and then he hits himself on the head with the crucifix. I'm probably going to get a lightning bolt any time now, so if you want to step away, be my guest. And this is St. Stephen, and these are his 3 rocks. So he's the first Christian martyr, and so this is something I make because I have an exhibition in Mexico, because we lost our faith somewhere along the line, as Mexicans still have, they still create their own saints for drug dealers, saints for all sorts of things, and so this is St. Stephen. So it's a bit like a Mexican's piñata, where people can throw rocks at St. Stephen, and then over time, obviously his face starts to break down. And this is, I mentioned, the first thing I noticed was St. Catherine, and that's her wheel that's what they put her on when they torture her. And she's also a Virgin Master. The chap on the right-hand side is a donor, so he would have paid for it's probably his own particular painting that he would pray to. And so St. Apollonia was a Virgin Martyr, and the same idea as St. Apollonia, pagan Roman tries to get her to pray to his gods, and she refuses, and eventually chops her head off. Milk flows from her body, and she's taken up to Mount Sinai to burial by angels. And so this is like spin the wheel, and it has, you can't see it, but it has a legend of St. Catherine on the wheel. And this is all the St. Catherine wheels from the National Gallery dumped outside the National Gallery, because there were originally 33 St. Catherine wheels, and then I discovered 2 more, so I had to make another drawing. And this is a Breaking News series. Breaking News is partly a biography of my works, but also like contemporary things as well. So I used the red and white to homogenize all the different kind of content. So obviously, some of it's, like I said, breaking news, so it's like rolling news. So some of it was, obviously, David Bowie had died, and Queen backs Brexit. So there, I mean, but also, I drew other artists' work, artists that I admired their work. I drew Frank Albach, Ed Ruscha, and various people. And then, because I'm an RA now, Royal Academician, and there are only 70 Royal Academicians. And what happens, so it's like dead man shoot. So someone has to die, a Royal Academician has to die. That's why I was talking about the Thunderbolt. And then if the Thunderbolt had hit me and killed me, then they would have got a note through the door. Each Royal Academician would have said, such and such had died. And then we would have an election to vote in a new member. But I find the meeting so boring that I decided to make my own sort of death certificate to say that I died, and so they would leave me alone. I think that's from the Daily Telegraph. I'm not laughing, as you can see. But so I've made about 800 breaking news series drawings, and it's the exhibition I ironically had at the Tangley Museum. So luckily enough, I didn't destroy it. So then I could put on an exhibition, and so that's all the backdrop to. It was an exhibition called Out of Order. So I just mixed all my work up. So it was no real chronological order. And then this is all part of the same kind of breaking news series. But like up until that point, I created all the content, and then suddenly I had this exhibition where I asked the Greek public, because the Greeks were going through, kind of financial collapse about 2-3 years ago. And so, when you watch television, you just saw lots of angry Greek people holding up placards. They're having all the social welfare cuts, huge unemployment, especially youth unemployment. And so Neon, it's not neon, it's a Greek word called neon, and they're similar to Art Angel. They ask artists to do public artworks in Athens mainly, but also in Greece. And so I speak to the Greek public. I ask them to send in content about their thoughts and feelings about living in Athens at this particular moment of time. And also drawing to me has always been my own practice, not. And then suddenly I have a team. Because of the amount of content we have, like via the website, we have coming in, visual content. There's a lot of graffiti. You ever go to Athens, there's also a lot of graffiti. So I have a team of people who create the drawings, and then they go up inside. And so that's part of the work as well, because people can also, as well as seeing the exhibition, they can also see in the works the things they've sent in being made as well. So it's one of the things I feel most proud of, because you build up this kind of connection, because I was there on and off for about 4 months, and it's obviously not my language, it's Greek. So a lot of my drawing assistants, they would also tell me about wordplay and contextualize things for me as well. So the drawings would go up. I would go back periodically and hang the work. So this is my graffiti room, and so I would also be on show when people came into the exhibition. They could see me installing things, because things change the whole time depending on, because the more content I get, the more chance I had to form these rooms. And this is the Anarchy room. And so so by the end of it, by June, the other idea was that this is a kind of Mother Greece, because it's not the first time that Greece has been bankrupt. And this is just some of the graffiti that I like I Love You, but I've chosen disco. That was also in the graffiti room. And that's the first time the country goes bankrupt. That's a Greek Prime Minister, and he asked the British for a loan, ironically, which they give him. And and then it's a little bird that escaped. So like I said, the red and white was like for danger signs. There's the blue and white is obviously the Greek flag, and that's what homogenizes all the content of the actual drawings. So I start to work with the space. I start to put drawings underneath the things, and also, this is an old dilapidated school, so I start to push drawings underneath the bits of plaster, because if you go to Athens, then, if you dig down a bit, you'll find an antiquity or something. That's why they can't really build an underground system there, because they'd be stopped every 5 minutes by the archaeological department. So what I really liked about it was like because it was not my culture in a sense, so it's like quite childlike in a way, putting things up against each other, and forming things, and I think only an outsider could have made this work, because otherwise, if it had been my own, my own culture, my own. I think it would have been much more difficult. This is the suicide note that someone had written before they killed themselves in one of the squares in Greece, and this is some of the writing that was already there in the building. So I try and really work with the building, because it is like everything in Athens looks great from the outside, but when you go inside it, it's all dilapidated and falling down. Ohi means no. The Greeks love to say no, but no one ever listens to them, and that's 9. So there's a kind of Greek-German thing going on at that time as well. It's like the antiquities room. And then I built a whole wall of protesters, people sending their protest signs. So as you imagine, the exhibition builds up to a crescendo by the end of June, and it was on at the same time as Documenta. Documenta was in Castle, but it was also partly in Athens. And at the end of the exhibition, they had a stamp on the back by Neon, but people got the artworks back. So it's like that kind of exchange where if people sent in their illustrations or text and they were accepted by me, then they would also, if they wanted to get the works back at the end, they could. So I like that kind of idea about exchange. And then this is an exhibition I had in New York, where first time ever, like I said to you, I always drew with something in front of me. Suddenly, I decided not to do that, and I make abstract drawings. I just start making really big abstract, that. It's like oil bar, and it's kind of wet, and then I would inscribe into it with big poles and stuff, and just kind of dig into it. And that's my drawing. That's hate. And then I make these abstract drawings. So it's quite liberating. I find it very liberating, not working from anything. I mean, scary and liberating at the same time. And this is Donald Trump. I made a whole wall about kind of protest, because suddenly when Donald Trump appeared, suddenly people started getting out their placards and protesting. So I make a whole kind of wall about all sorts of various issues, gender issues, all sorts of issues. Suddenly people became much more animated and politicized and socialized. And so I make these kind of protest wall. And then this is what Lawrence was talking about, the exhibition that I had. So that's all the protesters, but now they've been reformed, or as I like to say, transmogrified. And this is an exhibition that I had called Scaled Down at the Thomas Dane Gallery in last year. And as an artist, I mean, there are things like on the gallery's inventory, the things for sale. And some things remain on there for a number of years. And I think some works date back to 2004. So I decided to reform what's on each body of work into a cube. So each piece of paper is kind of measured, the thickness of it, and the actual, the spans of it, the width of it, and the length of it. And then we make a mathematical equation of the actual cuboid size of it, and then we make various molds, and then we put the drawings into the molds, and we make it smaller, and it's gradually smaller until it's the cuboid that we imagine. So so it's kind of like recycling, reforming something. So this is like that. The blue and white things were the drawings that I got back from Greece. The neon thing you see in the back, that's a closing down sale shopping trolley. I've got a couple of saints in the back. So various things that just kind of got reformed just into these low-level cubes. And that's my Acts of Kindness drawing. It's only about that big. And there we had a kind of little catalogue that just showed you what went into each particular drawing, and they're the drawings that were left over from In Your Face, and that's from Greece. And then last year also there was an exhibition, Biennale of Riga Biennale, and they asked me to take part, and I came up with various ideas, and then the Greek curator said, "Oh, we've got this kiosk, this old Soviet kiosk, because Latvia is a recent member of the EU, but formerly, the Russians were there." And I said, "I don't do anything with kiosks." And then I thought about it over the weekend, and then I came up with the idea of obviously creating a Brexit kiosk where I would sell, because Theresa May said that Britain was open for business. So I customized this, refurbished this old Soviet kiosk into a Brexit kiosk and sold British merchandise. That sign, open for business, that would revolve. We also had about 48 hours. We played British music, choral music, miners' music, all sorts of punk music, all sorts of music. And then we would sell kind of British products as well. And then I also created my own range of hard Brexit condoms and tea towels. We also sold Marmite, Weetabix, and then we had also had like tabloid newspapers from both British and international about kind of telling the story of the last 30 years of our membership. It's just I've made fridge magnets. Yeah, so up yours, up yours, Delors. So it looked from the outside, it looked like it was a Leave campaign kiosk. And of course, then British people, they're going on holiday and they think, "Oh fuck, what the fuck is that?" Trying to get away from that, and there it was. And then and we made some baseball caps as well. So there's a lot of up yours, hearts broken. And then recently I've put on an exhibition. John Caldor, a chap, he's a Hungarian 85-year-old, but he knocked on I only know that because he knocked on my door during breakdown and we let him in. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I started chatting to John, and it turned out he was a collector from Sydney in Australia. And I did the project, the Acts of Kindness project in Sydney with John. He's done projects over the last 50 years. The 50th year was this year, and the first project he did was with Christo and Jean-Claude, where they wrapped part of the Sydney shoreline back in 1969. So he asked me to come up with an idea for an exhibition to commemorate the anniversary of all these projects. So this is a drawing I made, a bit like my drawings from Scrap Heap Services, a kind of diaristic drawings about all these projects, and I kind of create and curate the exhibition, which just opened about a month ago at the New South Wales Art Gallery. So I'm very versatile. Thank you.